Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we welcome set decorator David Schlesinger, who joins us to talk about their work on Severance Season 2. David will talk us through what the creative process was for decorating the sets for the Inie and Outie worlds. Please be warned that there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with David. Hi, David. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Robert. Thank you for having an interest in Severance and in set decoration. I always love talking about our craft, which is often kind of way behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think with the production design, you guys are basically like creators of the world that we see on screen, and
That's right.
and there's so much you can. I don't know. I feel like there's so much that can go into what you're seeing on screen. I work in the industry myself, so I've been to prop houses before, and when you see what people can think about what they want to put into like just regular sets, it's just incredible. But then also these prop houses have everything to the point where you think like this is a hoarder's paradise. Um,
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. I probably used almost zero prop houses on Severance, so very little. For a couple reasons. One, I mean, it's just our world is so specific and unique. We bought a lot of our materials because our schedule is kind of drawn out, so it just sometimes makes more sense economically to buy stuff. And a lot of the items I would alter. So I we wanted everything to be a little offsetting, so I would change almost either we fabricated items or the things we bought we would alter in some way.
because it becomes sort of like cost effective by buying it rather than hiring it because everything is so specific in that Severance world. Where do you start looking for stuff to fill the sets? Is it a case of because it's very some of it's very specific in terms of a time period? Do you guys find it very difficult and then you have to sort of find those niche suppliers that will have them?
I spend a big part of my time sourcing. I have a large crew of people. I mean, I usually have on Severance had pretty usually four people, assistants working with me all the time, sometimes more, and they would be assigned a set, and then they would source specific items. We also fabricate a huge amount of the dressing, and I mean the great thing about Severance and I is that we build in a lot of time. Jeremy Hindle, our production designer, I said this in another interview. I mean, he's brilliant in so many ways, but he's also brilliant in just making sure we have enough time and building a schedule so we can really accomplish some very challenging tasks. So I would have for Bert's house, that was we knew about that for a while, and I probably had 4 or 5 months, maybe 6 months of being able to source items. There was sometimes you don't have that much time. Sometimes you have a week or so, but it's not like a typical project where sometimes you only have on an episode of television. Sometimes you only have a day or two, and in those cases, a prop house is fantastic. But fortunately, we had with time it gives us more options. We shop antique stores, we shop auction houses, we shop with collectors, we shop wherever whoever might have these things. We cast a far and wide net. We brought a lot of things in from Europe, Eastern Europe, because we wanted everything just wanted to be a little bit offsetting and not familiar. I didn't want to use things that we've iconic that we've seen in it before.
Yeah, of course. And I think when you're watching something like Severance, there is a because there's something off about the world. You don't really have those sort of, should we say, air quotes, like big brands that you might see in like everyday life. So like, I don't know, I think a good example is something like a Coke can, for example. I don't, the drinks that they have in the seventh floor all sort of covered up and indistinct, should we say?
I mean, everything we do is a choice. Everything we do, we put a lot of thought into. Yeah, and any place I can create something that is just a little bit weird, like what is that? I like to do. I mean, the tents at the retreat are a great example of that. We fabricated those tents, and so they're just a little weird, right? They have this strange interior frames, and they have this fabric that glows, and we spent a lot of effort, making those. It's not they look like maybe they were bought in a store, but you've never seen those before. So that was the desk in the control room. They look like what we call a tank desk, but they're not. We fabricated those. It would have been easy to go out and just get an old metal tank desk, police station desk, but we wanted something that was just again slightly off. It looks familiar, but it's not nothing you've ever seen before.
And I think as well, like as audience members, as you said, there's a slight familiarity, but then there isn't because it's just, as you said, you've made it in a way that it's not, should we say, normal.
Right.
In
We
what
we do that with time period too. We don't really have a time period. There's a big influence of mid-century because of Lumen Bell Labs as a mid-century building, but we really jump all over with time as well, just because it's purposeful. We don't want to really say when. We're not putting a timestamp on it.
I think that helps as well with when you step out of Lumen itself and you go into the outside world. Because you'll have that Lumen feeling when you go into sort of like episode 8 when Miss Cobell goes back to her hometown and
Yeah.
you feel that sort of I don't want to say like it's not necessarily darkness, but it's there's something there that it feels like something's withered away and everything it feels a bit it just feels very sad and
Yeah.
there's probably a weird smell of damp there as well. And those sort of little things. And you kind of notice that in stuff like the what was it that you put on the walls? Wallpaper. There we go.
Yeah.
Um and even like the bed and like you could imagine that bed like
Yeah.
being so rusty that it creaks and that is something like if you were to sleep in it you would probably as soon as a bit you move a little bit it'll probably make too much sound. But then also like the imagery in the show it's so it's very unique in terms of just how it looks and how everything moves. And and I do want to get onto this because I might as well just jump into it straight away. But it's funny how the weather plays a massive part in how the show looks. Because when you have, if we just say the sort of like present day stuff, everything's very sterile, everything's sort of futuristic, and it's got that sense of not necessarily like sadness, but it's got that sort of mundane that everybody's got the same thing. It's like IKEA furniture, for example. But then when we go to flashback where it's warm, you feel like so much more comes to life in how people live, and we see that in episode 7 as well. Um, how does stuff like the weather play into the way that you decorate the set?
I mean, weather is a big component of the look of the show. Obviously, in the Egan Mansion, it's all snow outside, and we put in white carpet in the house. It's all white carpet, so to give the sense that it's just kind of infinite. Like you start in that, and you're in this house with this white floor, and then it goes out to the windows, and it's snow. And yeah, the episode 7 is just I love episode 7, and I love the flashback pieces. And they were full of life at this point. That was to be they were it was it's a young couple, so to bring in a little bit more color in the house and just a little more sense of layers and the way people actually it's definitely a real environment compared to something more manufactured like the testing floor. So yes, weather is is part of it. It plays into the overall palette, I think, is maybe the best way to answer that. Like it was warm where the weather was better. Like in episode 7, we used warmer tones and warmer textures and palettes to fabrics, things like that.
And how do you decide on the sort of how warm you want to make things look? Because I can imagine as well, like because the show does have a distinct look, you don't want to go too far to one side of the spectrum that it would look a bit funny. But then if you go too far the other side, it might look a bit too cold and a bit too not flushed out. Yeah, flushed out, sorry.
I mean, with especially with episode 7, that's where it kind of departs from our normal palette and look. And there's a lot of conversations happen with our director, well, with in that case our director, who's Jesselyn Gagne, who was normally the show's DP, director of photography, but she was director of that episode. So we always talk and talk color and talk. We do an enormous amount of camera testing on Severance. Fabrics are all we test all the fabrics, so we have a pretty good sense of how it's going to play on camera. And it's just really having conversations with all the with costume designer, with director of photography, director, and of course production designer to come up with that kind of cohesive feel. The thing that really helps us again is time. A lot of times on a show you don't have time to camera test, or you don't have time to really be super thoughtful about these things. And fortunately, we build in that time to make these decisions and really make sure they're the right decisions.
I guess like having the time and all those tests, because with camera tests, I think when I first started, I always thought, why would you do a camera test? Surely you've kind of got an idea of how it looks, but it's actually how much you can probably play with it as well. And as you were mentioning as well, just even the colors and how will they react and bounce, or how certain fabrics might work or not work, which again is quite interesting because it must be having that time does make it easier for you. But then also just the idea of like thinking this would be perfect and then actually putting it under the lights and having it there and people interact with it might not work.
It happens. I mean, that's the benefit of testing. Although, I mean, as I got, as I was on the show for a while, and you start getting a sense of it. It's just kind of instinctual sense of what's going to work and what's not going to work. But there are surprises. The tent fabric for the retreat was a big surprise. The fabric that we chose, just in a natural setting, looking, and the fabric store I thought would never work. It was kind of purpley, but when we tested it, it was beautiful. It glowed. It did everything we wanted, and the color on camera was perfect. So it definitely helps, and definitely helps make our sets amazing.
Yes.
It's
And
definitely it's a luxury for sure. I haven't been on a lot of projects where we've had that luxury.
do you find as well having more time? You do mention that about like things to become instinctual, but do you feel that if you have a little bit more time, you might have too much time to overthink on what you want to put into uh, each set?
No, I would. It was rare that we ever had too much time. I mean, it was always, production is hard and challenging, and this, you're always fighting the clock. Even, but I'm saying we have more time than a typical project. So I don't think we ever really overthought anything. I didn't feel like that was an issue.
Okay. Yeah, I just think if you had too much time creatively, it could be sometimes you might be like, oh, or maybe I'll do this or maybe I'll do that, and then overcomplicate something that might be quite simple.
I think we were so busy that when we put a set together and we were able to finish it because sometimes it would sit for a couple of weeks before we shot it. We were on to something else. We didn't really have. I was thinking on to the next set as opposed to agonizing about, oh, did I use the right pillows or whatever the object was. Yeah.
Fair enough. I guess that also comes with it that if you are moving forward, it's that. that instinct of like, yeah, I've done it right. Let's go on to the next one.
Yeah, I mean, we are there are so many sets on Severance, and it's a lot to do. So it's a very busy show. And as a decorator, unfortunately a lot of my time is spent in meetings. I mean, it's not unfortunate because I'm getting information, but yeah, I have a great team that can be outsourcing things and solving these problems.
Yeah, well, I guess that's always the most important thing is how you build your team and how they sort of take on what needs to be done, but then also add their own spin to it all. What I'm curious to know about as well, because you weren't the set decorator in the first series, you came on in the second series. How did something like that come about, and what made you want to take the project on?
So Jeremy handles the production designer. He and I did a movie a while back called True Story, and it was a great job. We really hit it off. We're good friends, and we did a couple commercials, and we put on a lot of things together. And then Severance came about, and he had asked me to season one, and he had asked me to do it, and I was on hold for another project for a movie, I think, and I didn't really know what nobody really knew what Severance was going to be. I thought it was going to be, kind of more of a typical episodic television show. So I ended up passing on it. I recommended a couple friends, Andy Baseman being one of them, who was the set decorator for season one, and then for season two. And I was kind of involved early on with a little bit of research, and I mean Jeremy's a friend, so we were talking about things. So it wasn't like I was starting from scratch when I came in for season two, and then I think Andy wasn't available for season two, and so Jeremy reached back out to me, and I said, "Sure, let's do it." It was pretty easy stepping in. We had the sets that they had established, so there was already some. It took a good bit of work to get them kind of back up and running and cleaned up and fixed, and things kind of deteriorate a little bit as they sit. And then we had so many new sets that it was exciting for me to join. It wasn't. I don't think I would have done it if it was just all the old sets, but so much of what we did was new.
I think you kind of answered my next question because you're joining on, and even if you've seen the series and also talked to Jeremy previously when he might have been spitballing ideas, I was going to ask how do you add your own spin to it, but as you mentioned, if it's more than just what they've sort of once they sort of expanded on the world, it probably made it a lot easier for you to just join so that you can put your own spin on it and not sort of just copy what had happened before.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I took what they did in season one and built on it, and then for the sets that were already established, and then just started working on the new things. So it was pretty seamless, and plus I have a great relationship with Jeremy, so that helps.
Having sort of that relationship with Jeremy, obviously there'll be like a lot of shorthand because you know one another and you've worked a number of times. But how would you guys communicate with each other? Because he's sort of you're the new kid on the block. He's been there before, and then how do you communicate with one another? But then also sort of build on the previous season.
I mean, for me, the easiest way to communicate with any designer is just through imagery, through pictures. I'll put together a library of. I mean, every job I do, I do the same way. I start with a lot of research and visual research, and then I'll sit with the designer. They have a lot of research, and we look at it, and we get on the same page basically, and then I start once I know I'm headed in the right direction. I'll start looking at objects and shopping, and shopping doesn't mean actually getting things; it just means looking at a lot of things, and I'll put together sets with images, and then we'll sit again with the designer, and we'll say yes, this is right, and then once we kind of get that together, we'll present it to the director to make sure we're on the same page, and then we move full speed ahead in putting the set together. The last thing I want is a surprise. I don't want a director walking into the set and saying, "We didn't talk about this," or "I've never seen this before," or what. You don't want that. That's the worst thing that in my world that can really happen. So it's a lot of managing expectations and communication.
I would dread to think what would happen if you do go onto a set and it's like, well, why is this here? What's to go on here? Because then you just kind of miss the point of what people would want and the sort of brief. Um,
Yeah.
but then also, I can imagine sometimes it might be a happy accident to be like, actually, I didn't think about that.
I mean that happens as well. There are happy accidents, for sure. When we did, I think Milchek's office, Miss Cobell's office became Milchek's, and that was a redress. And I think that might have been our first kind of big set that I put together, and I had dressed it, and it looked great. I was really happy with it, and I walked Jeremy through it. He was like, "Oh, this is great. Let's get Ben in here." And I walked Ben through, and it was kind of my first set walking through with Ben, and it was just he liked it, but he kept grabbing objects and taking them away. It's like there's too much, there's too much stuff, and it was, at the time it was like, oh wow, I felt kind of bad, but then it was turned out to be brilliant. It was perfect. I love the way Milchek's set is, and it's because there's so little in there. So in that was kind of a little bit of a learning curve too. Because my natural instincts, I mean, I did the movie Knives Out. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's every inch is packed full of stuff. So I'm definitely kind of a maximalist, and so there was a little bit of a learning curve with Severance.
With something like that, because you'd have the director come on and start sort of saying what you should take out and what shouldn't be there. Because you do see, I'm even now looking at your website with all the photos from the show, there is that minimalistic feel. And it's funny because it's so sort of iconic. I can't imagine like the opposite way. But once you sort of do that first sort of walkthrough, does that then give you a better understanding of like, oh, okay, I know what they want in this world and how we can fit the brief of what we just went through at Milchek's office?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it definitely gives you the sense, and it's definitely better to take things away than to add things because it's easy to take something away, but if they ask for something that, why don't you have this? Then then you're scrambling, which I don't want to be in that position. So I'd rather give them something to take away. But yeah, after Milchek's, I had a much better sense of yeah, I thought I had dressed it pretty minimally. I think I had like five things on his desk, and I think we ended up with like one thing on his desk. But it was a good experience, and as I said, I'm really happy with the way the set turned out.
With I can't, it's crazy for me because I'm seeing the final version on screen rather than sort of bit by bit. Um, it's crazy to me because I think as set decoration is perfect because there's parts where it is clutter. There's a lot of clutter. So Miss Cobell, when she goes to that house, or even goes to the cafe, but then also you have everybody's like the Egan house where it's just a big open space. Personally, for me, if I was having such a nice house like that, it'd be like a big library for me. But for others, it's kind of just have a more minimalistic feel. They have the sofas that personally probably look very uncomfortable, but they do look quite cool. And yeah, you just can't help but fall in love with like the style and look, and even the retreat as well, where it is set at night and it's dark, but you can still see the sort of lush like browns that's being portrayed in the shot as well.
Yeah, I love the retreat. That was such a fun set. We built that on stage, and all the furniture in there is from a like 1930s company called Cushman, and I think it was I don't know what was the guy's name, Herman de Vries. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, but was the designer. So everything was the same designer, same company, and it was so beautiful. I love that set.
Even stuff like that where having like not knowing when something's set. So some in time. So for example, with if we look at the what's it called, the retreat, it just looks like a really lush place to go to. And I personally,
I was actually I think I might have misspoke. I was talking about the birthing cabin. Are we talking about the birthing cabin or the retreat with the tents and the
oh no, the birthing cabin place. Sorry,
birthing
I
cabin? Yeah,
should
yeah,
have. I
that's yeah,
sorry, I should have said. I should have been a little bit more specific. Sorry.
yeah,
It
yeah,
made sense in my head, so apologies.
yeah. Mine
Um,
too. And I'm like, wait.
it's like, hang on a second, there wasn't these seats in this tent. What's
Yeah.
going on? Is that season five? I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but the but even there, sorry, not knowing the time frame and looking at those sort of designs and looks, it's just, as I said, just looks lush and it just looks so warm and comforting. Um, but even like the lampshade, for example, usually you think it'd be too bright, but that just sort of conveys the light really nicely. I kind of want you to come over and do my house now because stuff like that looks really nice.
Yeah, I don't do private. Some decorators do private, interiors, and I don't think I could do it. I don't know. I don't think would interact well with clients, but I guess I interact well with directors. Maybe it's the same thing.
It could be. It depends on what sort of client you get because
Yeah, I guess.
yeah, because I can imagine you can get very difficult people, and it's yeah, it could be quite scary if something goes wrong.
I mean, the,
Um,
the thing I love about being a set decorator is that occasionally we do beautiful interiors like the Egan house, but I also do, you know, well, there wasn't a crack house in or a drug den in Severance, but I do all kinds of. I can do anything, police stations or beautiful mansions, or so it's that variety that I really love about the job and having to learn, about a specific environment and then bring it to life.
I think it's also what you could do with the space because when I've seen set decorators operate, it's amazing what construction production design do, but then also what they can add into the space. I think at one time we were in this big, I guess it's kind of like a meeting hall, but they got completely couldn't change to a police station, and I think police station in Hong Kong, and you just walk around and they'll have like the cats that arms move and everything was so authentic and it was just like wow this is insane but I can step outside and I'm on the outskirts of London. It's like in a weird way it kind of a bit like messes with your mind a little bit.
Yeah,
um
I love that transformative process. And
I think it's just incredible to see. It's kind of my favorite part of filmmaking just because you're in that world and you're just creating something that looks incredible but then also adding to it and making it its own character as well because I think when people talk about characters, it's always kind of either like the actors or the acting or the story, but then it's actually what's being created around and how we're seeing it visually as well.
yeah, I mean that's one of the things I love about Severance is that the sets are a character. I mean, it's such a big part of this show, and the producers realize that and they treat it that way. They give it the respect that gives us the time to create these spaces. It's not just the background. It's a place that people inhabit, and it tells a story.
I was gonna ask this off before, but it kind of slipped my mind a bit. When you do walkthroughs with various directors, because there is showrunners on the show that will have like overlook over the big picture and we'll probably have sign off on how final looks are. But when you work with different directors for different episodes, how does that work in the way that you do your work and decorate the sets?
Well, Severance is a little bit different, but typically on episodic television, there's a showrunner who is dealing with the big picture and kind of keeping the from episode to episode, director to director, keeping the flow going. With Severance, I mean, that a lot of that falls on Jeremy, and a lot of it falls on Ben. I mean, he's involved, even in direct episodes he's not directing, he's involved visually. He'll see what we're doing. So there's that through line. So visually, it really, I think I would say Jeremy is the person who's keeping that consistent look and feel going. The designer, production designer is really involved in the big picture and the continuity between episodes and the tone and the color and I look to them to keep me on track to make sure I'm doing the right things to support that vision.
Okay, because I can imagine that there's always, because there is so many different people working, and obviously they're pulling in the same direction, but then everybody wants to sort of add their own little spice to the stew, in the show that you're creating.
Yeah, I mean everybody puts their twist on it, but I still think there's so much respect for what Jeremy does and for what Ben does. They usually defer to them. I'm trying to think
Okay.
if there was any of an instance with another director, with one of our directors, where no, I think it was no, it was always pretty smooth.
Yeah. Well, again, I think when you're all sort of working on something and know what the end goal is, then you kind of understand what you're doing. And I think sometimes it's not about, as someone who'd be working on it, it's like not necessarily about the brush stroke, but it's about the whole
Right.
painting itself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't view Severance, I view it as a whole. I don't really view it episodically. And, I was saying, tell friends who would watch it, they'd watch a couple episodes. I mean, you have to watch the whole thing. You have to view it as a complete piece of art, not just, the individual pieces. So, it was important that all the episodes kind of have a cohesion to them, cohesiveness to them.
Yes, and it's amazing though as well. Once you mention it, it's like each episode can actually potentially feel like the last episode of the series because of how well the cliffhangers are and just how well that, like, it doesn't really dwell in the storytelling. Like it moves out quite fast paced, which it's kind of like unusual these days as well with streaming, where sometimes you would have a series that has 12 episodes when it could have been like 10.
Hmm.
And what I'm curious to know about as well is, paintings play a big part in this series. They did in the previous series as well, but I feel like it's much more in your face. And they're gorgeous to look at, slightly creepy at the same time as well. How do you go about choosing what paintings to have, or were these painting ideas already in the script and you kind of had to interpret what was written to then produce something that
Well,
was,
so
um,
most of the paintings on the severed floor are all of them are actually we created or the art department created. We have a fantastic illustrator who's on full time creating these things, and then he and Jeremy would work together to develop the idea of it, and then our scenic department would paint them. On the severed floor, the only painting that's actually real, that by real I mean that we got from an artist, was the iceberg painting in Milchek's office. And then on the Audi world, a lot of those paintings are things that like the art at Bert's house is stuff that I found art we sourced. So but back to the severed floor, the murals, the new paintings in the elevator lobby, those are really more fall into Jeremy's world. I didn't have a whole lot to do with them.
oh, okay. I thought they would be part of your world, but I guess it's like 50-50 if you're sourcing them for outside in terms of Bert's Place compared to.
I mean, the ones that we created, yeah, really, I my involvement was fairly minimal. And if it was something we were sourcing again, that would be my world. That would be something I would get.
When you are sourcing paintings for characters' houses, do you have something already in mind when you're going to look, or do you go with sorry for the pun, with a blank canvas to figure out what would fit well in people's houses and what would match their character?
A little bit of both. my favorite way to shop, I mean, things I've been doing this a long time, so now a lot of decorators will sit on the internet shopping, which I mean, I do it because it's convenient, but it also takes something away from it. My favorite thing to do is to be in a vendor or source, wandering around and just start thinking, and I'll see something and it'll spark an idea and it'll lead to another idea, and then before you know it, it's all coming together. So I try to have a pretty open mind. The paintings in Bert's house, which I just love and think are perfect. I I discovered that way. I was wandering around a vendor and saw them, and that's it. That's perfect. Doing a lot of research early on in the project, I kind of have a visual guide in my head, and then so I think when I see something, it just kind of fits right in. I mean, that's how I discovered the furniture for the birthing cabin. I was in a warehouse full of stuff, and I saw this furniture. I'd never seen it before, and this particular dealer had a lot of it. They had hundreds of pieces of it. They have most of the stuff that's in existence, and it just seeing so much of it and seeing something I've never seen before, and something that was really beautiful. It just was instantly. I knew that we had to use it. So what I'll do, so then I see that, I get the idea, I'll put it together, and then I'll show that to Jeremy because we're everything is collaborative, and he's like, oh, this is amazing, we got to use it. And then at that point, we'll show it to in that case, Ben was directing that episode, so we'll show it to Ben, and he's like, yeah, that's great, let's move forward with it.
Okay, cool. I just think again, if you go, I can imagine that you can go into a big rabbit hole of designs and
Yeah, I
um
love that.
do you ever think though sometimes when you're looking at something that it could be perfect for the show, but then you also think this actually this would look quite good in my living room.
All the time. And what that results in after over years of doing this is just having a lot of mismatched stuff that's not so great anymore.
But then
But
also
yes,
it means that your place is quite what's it called, unique in the way, what's it called, in the way that it looks. And
it was. I actually recently renovated and got rid of so much of my stuff just because I was kind of tired of looking at it, and it was getting quite cluttered. So I've pared down.
okay, but at least that, well, I guess in that sort of way as well, you can kind of like all those memories of stuff that you've had from over the years can get passed down, or you can always open up your own little prop house and rent them out.
I think about that as well. So I have a storage unit full of crap, and my wife is like, "We have to get rid of it. You don't want to leave this for all the kids to deal with the kids to deal with when we're no longer around." I'm like, "Oh, they'll figure it out, or we could just sell it, or have a prop house." I think about that often, but then I get busy on a project, and then I don't have time to do it.
And then you get some more stuff as well.
You're right? Yeah. Then we gotta get another. Then we get another storage unit.
Um, what I'm curious to know about as well is with Severance being such a mystery box show where us as the viewers are kind of pretty much in the same frame of mind as the characters of what is going on, and we're finding out information kind of at the same time, maybe a little bit ahead depending how sharp you are as an audience member. And when it comes to these kind of shows, does it affect the way that you decorate because you can hide little Easter eggs, or do you not think about that at all?
I don't think about it that much. I don't want to. I have to be careful to put. I don't want to put something on a set that is going to give away anything. So I have to be a little careful in that sense. Dan, our writer, was super open. So I mean, I'm very accessible. So I could bounce ideas off of him sometimes, and he would say, "Yeah, that's a great idea," or "Let's maybe you shouldn't do that." So that was helpful. But I'm not really. No, I don't. I don't put a lot of Easter eggs in.
I get again.
We put objects that are mysterious. I love I love that the show is so interactive that people can look at something, and I love reading, all there's so much people stuff online, people trying to interpreting things, and although I think they're all right, everybody's right because it's like a piece of art, you interpret it, everybody's going to look at it differently and have their own reaction to it, and I really love that about how interactive the audience is with what we're doing. And sometimes they point things out that we have a lot of happy accidents that you mentioned that earlier and coincidences on Severance, and sometimes they point things out I didn't even realize we had done. So, um, but I think there in episode 7 we had in Mark and Gemma's house we had thistles, the flower thistles in her kitchen. And as it turned out, it's a theme in the Tolstoy book that Gemma is, earlier we see her at Gans College preparing a lecture, and a thistle is a theme in that book, and that she's talking about. And it's just a total happy accident that we had we ended up using them. So things like that, I didn't realize that until somebody had pointed that out.
I think subconsciously you knew about it,
I think I
but
might have. I mean, that also is definitely a possibility.
again, it's what that's another thing I love about the show is when you go on stuff like Reddit and what people are talking about, or how they're saying about just those little things that they notice. I think that's quite fun, and you're right about how people can interpret art and their viewpoints on it. I do. I think that's what makes the show special. But I guess if you're working on a show like that as well, that must be quite a crazy thing as well. The amount of chatter there is online about it, and especially when you think about like you think the show's going to zig, but then it does something completely different. It doesn't even zag, so it's not even in the same sort of rhyme space of it all. And I think that's like the kind of the best thing about that show.
Yeah, I mean, as an odd, I love watching it, and I've read all the scripts. I know I know what's happening, but just watching it is just I love it. I was so excited. We would watch it every Friday, at 8 or 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and it was we made an event out of it, which something I really look forward to.
You, as someone, because you worked on it, you've read the scripts and you know what's going to happen and what's happening. How is it watching it like in its completion phase?
Amazing. I mean, I just found myself forgetting everything I know and watching it like any other audience member. I really loved watching it, and the performances are amazing. You know, the cinematography is unbelievably great. It's a beautiful show, and I love the story.
Yes, well, can't go wrong with it, and
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see what happens if there's a third series. I've got two more questions, if you don't mind. What was the hardest prop for you guys to source for the show?
I mean, it was anything that we had to fabricate was a challenge because it just involves so much looking after. I think the tents and the retreat were really challenging because they had to hold up to the environment. They weren't, and we ended up shooting in the retreat longer than I think we had originally planned. We had some weather issues, and I think one night we had 100-mile-an-hour winds, and the tents were not really they weren't designed for that. So and the fabric we chose was beautiful, but it wasn't. It had a tendency to wrinkle, and which isn't really a Severance look. So getting everything taut and getting the wrinkles out was a real challenge. So the tents were tough. The conference table in the new boardroom we fabricated. It wasn't that hard. It was just it was a massive undertaking. It was a 40-foot table that we made out of. I was looking at a lot of different materials, and I wanted something that we wasn't really recognizable and that was kind of ethereal. And I started looking at a lot of resin artists We ended up making a table. It's a resin table that we worked with an artist to create.
For something like a resin table, something like that, I don't really know what a resin table is, so you have to excuse me for it. I've just quickly did a Google so I can get an idea of what it looks
Yeah,
like.
it's like a pour. I'm probably defining it wrong, but it's like a poured. Not really plastic. I guess it is a plastic, but it kind of has a glow to it.
It's like I can imagine if like if somebody had like a really nice bit of wood and then they laminated it with and sort of added polish to it, not polish, but like like another layer of sheen onto
Yeah,
it.
it has some no, because it has some a little bit of translucency to it. So like kind of depending on how thick the resin is, so it kind of glows, which was the desired effect. That was something else we made. We took samples of the resin, we did camera test to get it to the point where it was doing what we wanted it to do. I mean, I love that table that boardroom is one of my favorite sets.
That was going to be my next question was what was your favorite set to design? But I think you just answered that.
I mean, there's so many. I mean, also Mark and Gemma's house, which is more like a normal, like a set that a tip, I don't, a non-Severance set, and her office those were a lot of fun. Like, she teaches Russian literature, so all the books in that set, you never see, with so much of what we do, you never see on camera. I mean, I would say 40, you see 50, maybe 50 or 60%. Like in her office, all the books are Russian. They're Russian literature, we just reached out to Russian professors of Russian literature and bought their libraries. Essentially, we found a lot of people who were retiring and like, yeah, I'll sell you my whole library. And I do that for. I mean, and I knew we probably would never see it on camera, but I do it for the actors as well. I want them to feel like they're in a real place. So we put a lot of attention, like in Mark and Gemma's house. The books in his office, all relate to World War I or world history. And she has a section of Russian literature in the house as well. So just to try to make those faces as real for the character as possible is always a fun thing to do.
Just sparked something in my head, and I'm really sorry to say this. I've got
No,
one more question, so this will be final
sure,
question,
yes.
point five. You talk about actors and making sure that when they step onto sets, things are real. Are there times where actors would come and sort of do a character walkthrough of the set to be like, oh, this is my house, so I would expect to open this drawer, there would be knives and forks, or as you pointed out with books, the one side would be World War One history, and then the other side would be Russian literature. Are there times where you might need to change the set a little bit for the actor to then feel a bit more comfortable moving and performing in that space?
I mean, it depends on the actor. And my goal is for that to create the space that they walk in and they feel like they're in their home. So, if I feel if I do my job correctly, I'm not going to have much input from the actor other than, oh my God, this is like, I'm at home. Sometimes I know we reached out to Trammell about his office, Milchek's office, to get his input before we did it, just because we were trying to figure out what it would be, what would be in there. He had the idea. He had mentioned icebergs, and that's where the idea for the iceberg painting came from. And so sometimes we'll reach out and have a conversation with them, but generally we base it just on the script and the character. So
Okay.
again, every situation is going to be different, and it's going to depend on the talent and what the set is, and
Yeah, and it comes down to actors' availability and also how much time do you have, and what you want to use in that space.
it can be a
Um,
little dangerous. I mean, this isn't a severance situation, but I've had situations on jobs where we'll approach the actor, and they'll have ideas that are counter to what you want to do, and then you're kind of like, oh, I really don't want to put whatever that big pink chair in the corner. So it's tricky.
yeah, and I didn't actually think about that, how somebody's suggestion might not be for what you guys have all sort of planned out, or even how the scene's been pre-lit and ready to shoot on. David, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Robert. It was great.
Thank you again, David. Severance season 2 is streaming now on Apple TV Plus. Make sure you go out and see and appreciate all of David and his team's hard work on the screen.
Thank you, Robert. It's been a great interview, and I've enjoyed spending a little bit of time with you.
Thank you very much. You take care, and thank you again.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.